Hello, everybody. I'm here to present Blaise Laflamme, who will be speaking about upgrading your web development toolchain. Please welcome him with an applause.
Hello, thank you. So, welcome to my Upgrade Your Web Development Toolchain talk. So, as usual, a bit about me. So I'm doing a full stack web development. I mostly lead project and teams, and still learning a lot every day, probably as all of you. So what this talk is about? In fact, this talk is about more ideas and patterns. It's about combining tools. It's also about working with people on project. It's not about, let's say, strong opinions, because I'm not a over-opinionated guy. It's not about cookbook recipes too, and it's not in-depth technical examples. I'm open to everything, so if you want to discuss anything about what I'm talking today after, I'll be happy to talk with any of you. So the talk was under the best practices and patterns. So let's just talk a bit about that. Dogmatism is never a good thing. So I think being close to other ideas is not a good idea in itself. I try to not be dogmatic about what I've just said, but I think it's the right way to be open to others. It should always have a significant benefit. So it means, why would you do something and it gives you less after? So it means you need, at minimum, a significant benefit, and to stick to what really makes a difference. So why would you use tools because of a hype, let's say, and rewrite everything, and in the end, you get the same results? So you should be careful about what you should to use. Then, the idea of the talk is based about problem I tried to solve across the years. It's mainly based on how to tie up multiple in-development projects. So for sure, when you have just one project, you install and everything, it's easy. But at some point, you'll need to separate in some components. It could be like you separate. In that case, will be more like the front-end stuff with the back-end stuff, but you can start like sharing components like for web forms, database, or anything you want to reuse across project. And then the idea is to have an environment where you can develop those multiple projects at the same time. So to tie up multiple environments and tools, and to mix up development teams. Because at some point when your project grows, you'll have more people involved and probably more teams. It could be remote teams too. So you need to find a way to mix up all those things together in the same way. So my point of view is the separation of concerns. So for sure, for each of us, concerns could be different. It could be different, like I said, after adapt to context, so depending on the context. So it's also use known tools. That's good to create your own stuff, but at some point you get stuck with what you're doing. So try to use tools that already exist, that people are behind those tools, so if you need help or anything, and try to adapt to context. That means that the one ring to rule them all is not a good way to think about things. So it's not because you develop a way of doing things, that way will be good for everything you'll be doing. Sometimes people like concept and ideas and tools and make everything fits in those patterns. I think people are more important than tools, so we should find a way to make the most out of people. So what will people do if I die, if you die? It means if I create a lot of things that I like and I'm alone to work with. So if at some point I'm no longer part of the project, people will get stuck with what I've done and they'll have to rewrite everything. So when you manage something, you should be careful about what you use and be sure you do things in a way people will be able to continue and work on top of what you've done. So what's the typical workflow for a project. I mean, it's basic thing. I don't want to go too much in detail. It's just like to understand like the steps. So normally you'll have like a server provisioning and setup. You'll have web application development, and you'll have the deployment phase. So for the provisioning and deployment, you need somewhere to run your application on. So it could be your own machine, it could be a developer machine, it could be a dedicated hardware, it could be any of the awesome cloud thing we have like Linode, the Rackspace, Heroku, and it could be set up manually by someone or with an orchestration tool like Ansible, SaltStack, Docker images. It could be presented in any way. But we should not care where the application will run. Yes, for deployment, but when you develop, it should not be your concern. So they should call you in their process of building their setup and their deployment environment. So they should provide you all the tools like database and caching system and all that stuff. So a developer could install all of that by himself with a system package if you want to use like a virtual machine or anything. We should not care when we organize the way the app environment is done. So the app environment should be self-contained as much as possible. So if it's self-contained, eventually it will be able to be run on multiple platforms environment, and that will provide a better tested and robust code base. So to bring back the concept of people is I still think in a team, tools are not more important than people. So you won't ask like your developer to use Vim because you have developed a lot of super awesome macro, and then you'll want everyone to use the same setup than you. And most of the developers use a system, they tweak the way they want to have their own stuff on it, their database and everything. So I think your app environment should not tell them how to use their own computer and their own way of doing things. And if you want to get the most out of them, you should let them work in a way they're effective. So the web app development actually is mostly front-end and back-end work. So when you do back-end, mostly you're doing, for us, Python. We're using web frameworks like Pyramid, Django, Flask. We use template engines like Mako, Jinja 2, Chameleons, ORM, and all other libraries. And for front-end, they use like HTML, CSS, JavaScript. They use frameworks too, like Angular, Backbone. They use preprocessor like Less, SAS, CoffeeScript, and a lot of stuff they're used to. So both have developed their own expertise, tools, and workflow. So in some corners, they overlaps. Some others, they are like complementary. Just as an example, if we look at package management, so under Python we're used to, so we can do easy install or pip install a package or a package with its own version. And for front end, they can do the same, like Bower install jQuery or jQuery a specific version. And in files, like in requirement.txt or a setup file, we can specify all the required libraries with their own version. And with a Bower file, a JSON file, we can do the same thing for the front end. So what is Bower? It's simply a package manager for the web. But actually, the problem is, where is the line? The front-end developer will need like to know Python and add his own dependency in Python code. So at some point, it makes no sense to have the front-end developer relying on the back-end stuff. So let's look a bit with asset management. So we can use on the backend side web assets. That is a great tool where you can define, let's say, bundles. With those bundles, you can define a lot of different files. You can apply filters to, let's say, minify them, cache busting, everything, and like the output file, let's say pack.js. And then within the application or within the template, you can reference the file, and then it writes the right URL and everything. So for a backend user, it's awesome because it eases a lot of things. But they have the same or something similar in the front-end world. So they have their own tools to, let's say, minify packages. And then if you look at that small snippet, so it loads a module, Grunt, a JSMin source map, and then it registers a task, and the task is defined in the config. So you would say there's no way in the backend like to reference those URL and everything, but that's a bit the point, because at some point, you'll reach, sorry. So just to get back, Grunt, like you said, is a task runner for automation. So it's a tool for them to help them like to do a lot of things we normally do on the backend side, but for them. And then, sorry. Okay, I was referring to how we reference things in like the application. So in the front side, the front-end side, they also need a way of including, import, and require libraries. What we do on the backend side, but at some point they need that too because the application becomes more and more complicated. So they need a way to load dependencies too. So if you look at this simple snippet, you'll see that you can define a path for jQuery for a specific library, and then in their own code, they can, let's say, add jQuery and make it available as the $string inside that module. So why would you want front-end to rely on a back-end dependency? Why would you want them to know about Python? So you'll reach a point of separation where when the application is an hybrid application, so a lot of stuff is done on the front end, or it's a single page application. So in that case, your back end becomes like just an API. So it won't make sense to have those front end developers relying on all the stuff you can do on the back end. So you'll benefit from splitting to multiple projects. So multiple projects could be per team or per concern. So in that case, it means probably back-end stuff and front-end stuff. So let's say we have a single page app, so we can have like the back-end in a GitHub repo, a package, and the same for the front-end. But what we want is to use those projects under the same global app or project environment and share a common set of tools and patterns. So this is where Buildout entered the game. So Buildout is it's application-centric. So it is the assembly and deployment of application environment and make that a repeatable process. So Buildout uses extendable configuration files, so simple like ini file. It uses extensions, and it uses receipts. So if you look at a simple Buildout config file, you'll see like the build-out part where I use the extension Mr. Developer. It's an extension like to ease the development of multiple in-development projects, so you can have like multiple repo under the same application environment. It extends configuration files on GitHub done by Balashri, who was kind enough to create that simple config files that wraps like Grunt and Bower command inside your application environment. And then you'll see I have different parts like deers, eggs, and Bower modules. Bower modules inherits from the Yeoman configuration. And then under develop, this is where I have my multiple application, so my app 1 and my app 2 and so on. And under dirs, I use a recipe to create a directory. So let's say a var directory for temporary things I'll need for my application. And then the source, my app1 and my app2, where to get them from. And in the egg part, I have a recipe like to install like my app1 and my app2 that will have their dependency, and I can add other dependencies just like for the project. So if I want like to say to add app and light client to have monitoring for my application, instead of defining that into my setup.py project, it would be a better place to have that in the app environment configuration. So the idea is to provide a development project that builds the application environment. So you have a new project and you don't care about my app1 and my app2 and do a git clone and do the pull and everything. So it's the application environment will take care of building everything. So basically what you get is that. So you have a Grunt file for the Grunt tasks. So you'll probably have a Makefile. I'll tell you a bit more about after. You'll have like the bootstrap.py file that's used to bootstrap the build-out environment. So the Bower for the Bower dependencies, your JavaScript dependencies, the build-out configuration, probably an etc directories for your application configuration, and the package.json, it's for the node module package management to install, let's say, Grunt and Bower and other required libraries. Then, to set up the project, you'll have like to clone that environment project, then cd your app, do a virtual env, and then run Bootstrap. Bootstrap will bootstrap Buildout, and then run Buildout, and Buildout will take care of installing everything you need for your application. Then you're done. So people can start working on your project. Why it makes sense? It's because I don't think you need to provide a full stack environment with all the server components under a virtual machine or an image or anything else for developing an application. For deployment, yes, but for development, it's a bit different, I think. So it will look a bit like that. So once you install your application, you get all the same files plus other ones like the bin, the include done by the virtual env, and the eggs done by the build-out configuration, and you get the node modules and the components for Bower and the node modules. Then another simple way to wrap those commands in an easier way would be to use, let's say, a Makefile just to wrap those commands under a common API. So front-end people don't care like to know about Python commands, and probably back-end people don't care about knowing the front-end command. So you can probably create like a Makefile where you wrap how you create the virtual env, how you bootstrap a build-out, how you run build-out, and have a command set up that runs all those commands. So in the end, let's say your front-end developer, to get started on the project, will just have like to clone your project and then cd the app and make setup. Everything will be done, and then you could have other commands like make run app that will do like a pserve, your ANI file, and then run the web server. And when you separate project, so let's say you have the front end totally standalone, so Grunt provide a small web server for them to develop. So there's no need for them to run your Python code to test and organize their thing. But at some point, it would be important like to run the backend or anything. So both projects can coexist under the same app environment. So in fact, the goal is to isolate application environment. It's to organize projects in a flexible way and give more power to users and team. So, any questions? That was fast.
If anyone has a question, there's a microphone over there for asking questions. I guess no questions. So thank you very much. There's
Time for lunch.
There is a question.
I was just going to ask you afterwards, but I guess I can ask it for everybody here. Buildout is pretty cool, but what happens when you have repositories that depend upon other repositories which themselves have their own setups which are arbitrarily complex?
Yeah, probably with like the submodule with GitHub. You mean the Git submodules?
Not Git submodules. I've been burned by that one once or twice already. So actual separate Git repositories that your code project, if you've split something out into multiple Git repositories for some reason, and module A and module B are separate Git repos.
Yeah.
And how would you use Buildout to actually check all of that stuff out and set up both environments independently because they have overlapping requirements but not complete overlapping requirements?
Well, I mean, for multiple projects under the same application environment would probably means you need the same set. So if you develop like 3 different modules, you probably need the same virtual env and everything. So it's not different. Let's say it's not multiple virtual env inside the same application environment.
That's correct.
But you'll need the same requirements for all those modules. But at least Mr. Developer, as an extension, lets you have comments to all those checkout and everything under the application environment. But it won't create different virtual env for those different projects, okay. Actually.
That's actually good. That's exactly what I would want it to do.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. Let's give Blaise a hand and thank you.
Thank you.